Yes, let's talk about hockey, the show that journeys through the history of the sport of ice hockey from its disputed origins to the game we see today. Continuing to battle with the World Hockey Association, the NHL expanded for the third time in 5 years with the introduction of 2 more teams for the 1974-75 season. The Scouts, another team we've already talked about, the league based in Kansas City, Missouri, while the second team to enter the league that year was set up in Washington, D.C., and since they were established in the capital of the U.S., they naturally named themselves the Capitals.
With a combined 30 teams between the NHL and the WHA, the available talent to stock both of the new expansion clubs was stretched pretty thin. With only 11 of the 39 players that suited up for Washington during the club's first season having played 100 games or more in the NHL, the Capitals were at a disadvantage against many of the other teams that were stocked with more veteran players. Captained by defenseman Doug Moens, the most experienced player on the team's roster, the Capitals took to the ice for their first game on October 9, 1974 against the New York Rangers at Madison Square Garden. Indicative of how this first season would go, Washington's first game would end in a 6-3 loss. It would take a few more games before the Capitals registered their first win on October 17, 1974 against the Chicago Blackhawks by a 4-3 score. Unfortunately, wins would come few and far in between for Washington. By the end of the season, the club's record of 8-67-5 set new NHL marks for fewest wins and most losses in a single year. Additionally, their 39 road losses, 37 of which were consecutive, their 17-game losing streak, their 446 goals against, and their .131 winning percentage also set new NHL records. Needless to say, there was no team in the league that performed worse than the Capitals that year. This season was especially hard on the coaching staff, as the club went through 2 head coaches over the first 72 games of the year before the general manager Milt Schmidt stepped in to coach the final 8 games. In the club's second season, things did not improve much. Though Washington finished with 11 more points in the standings than they did the previous season, this year still contained a 25-game winless streak, another mid-season coaching change, and a dead last league ranking. Over the next 6 seasons, the club's woes would continue. Though they were no longer the worst team in the league during these years, within their division the Capitals still placed in dead last or second from last at best. With the exception of hard-hitting defenseman Yvan Lebray, 79 draft pick Mike Gardner, and 78 draft picks Ryan Walter and Bengt Gustafsson, there were very few bright spots for Washington during this stretch.
With the club on their 5th head coach in 6 years and surrounded by rumors of relocation, former Calgary Flames assistant GM Dave Poile was brought in as the Capitals' new general manager in the summer of 1982. As his first move, Poile traded center Ryan Walter and defenseman Rick Green to Montreal in exchange for all-star defenseman Rod Langway, who would be named the new team captain, Ironman center Doug Jarvis, defenseman Brian Engblom, and winger Craig Laughlin.
With Langway and the club's newest first-round draft pick Scott Stevens on the blue line strengthening their defensive game, and Mike Gartner, Dennis Marek, and Bobby Carpenter's 226 combined points leading the way offensively, the Capitals jumped 29 points in the standings from the previous year to finish 3rd in their division and qualify for the playoffs. Unfortunately, their first appearance in the playoffs would not last long, as they were outscored by the 3-time defending Stanley Cup champion New York Islanders 19-11 over 5 games. Though they were eliminated in the first round, Captain Rod Langway brought the team some recognition by becoming the first Washington Capital to win an individual award when he earned the Norris Trophy for Best Defenseman that year. The 1983-84 season that followed, however, did not start off well as the Capitals lost their first 7 games of the year. But after the 6th loss, Washington's management made a deal to further strengthen the team's defensive core when they dealt winger Ken Houston and defenseman Brian Engblom to LA in exchange for defenseman Larry Murphy. This deal worked incredibly in Washington's favor. Despite losing their first game after acquiring Murphy, the Capitals went on a 5-game winning streak afterwards, and by the end of the year, the team had not only tallied over 100 points in the standings for the first time in their history, but also finished only 3 points behind the Islanders for the division lead. Additionally, 5 players would earn individual awards as well, with Rod Langway winning his second consecutive Norris Trophy, Doug Jarvis taking home the Selke Trophy for Best Defensive Forward, Coach Brian Murray walking away with the Jack Adams for Coach of the Year, and Al Jensen and Pat Riggin sharing the Jennings Trophy for allowing the fewest goals against. Making it to the playoffs for a second straight year, the Capitals were first matched against the Philadelphia Flyers, a team that had finished a mere 3 points behind Washington. Despite their close regular season finishes, Washington dominated Philly, outscoring them 15-5 to sweep them in 3 games for the club's first playoff series win.
Unfortunately, in the second round, the Capitals again ran afoul of the Islanders, who were once again defending their Stanley Cup title. After another 5-game series like the previous year, Washington found themselves out of the playoffs again. This growing rivalry between the Capitals and Islanders was only just beginning. Over the next 3 seasons, Washington would finish ranked second in their division, and in each one of those years, they would face the Islanders in the playoffs, beating New York only once out of these 3 matches.
Over the next 2 seasons, more stars would continue to emerge from Washington, like defenseman Kevin Hatcher and center Mike Ridley, and a few more would arrive when winger Dino Ciccarelli and defenseman Bob Rouse were acquired from Minnesota, and center Dale Hunter was brought in from a deal with the Quebec Nordiques. The Capitals would also continue their regular season success over these 2 years, even winning the club's first ever division title in 1988-89. However, this success did not translate over into the playoffs. Despite 7 consecutive playoff appearances since 1983, Washington could seem to get no farther than the second round before being eliminated. In the 1989-90 season, despite coming off a division championship the previous year, the Capitals got off to a slow start, going 18-24-4 during the first 46 games, prompting the team's management to replace head coach Brian Murray with his brother and assistant coach Terry Murray. Washington would post a winning record during the remaining games after the coaching change, but overall they still finished the year with their first losing record in 8 years. However, this was still good enough to earn the 7th playoff spot in their conference. In the first round against the New Jersey Devils, where 5 of the 6 games would be decided by only a single goal, the Capitals would manage to pull off the upset thanks primarily to the 11 goals and 14 points put up by Dino Ciccarelli and John Druce. In the second round, Washington went up against the number 1 team in their division, the Rangers. Despite losing the first game 7-3, the Capitals managed to outscore New York 19-8 over the next 4 games, with the last 2 being decided in overtime to pull off yet another huge upset and make it to the 3rd round of the playoffs for the first time in the club's history. However, when matched against Cam Neely, Ray Bourque, Andy Moog, and the rest of the President's Trophy winning Boston Bruins in the conference finals, Washington was unable to win a single game, falling in 4 straight to Boston.
Over the next 6 seasons, the Capitals would again manage good regular season performances, only to crumble in the first or second round of the playoffs, usually to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who they faced 5 times in the playoffs over this time span, only to lose to them 4 times. Then, in the 96-97 season, despite winning the Vezina Trophy the previous year, Washington's goaltender Jim Carey struggled through the season before he was eventually dealt to Boston along with center Jason Allison and winger Anson Carter, in exchange for Adam Oates, Rick Tocchet, and goalie Billy Ranford. Unfortunately, this deal was unable to save the Capitals' season, and for the first time in 14 years, the team failed to make the playoffs.
To start out the 97-98 season, Ron Wilson was brought on as the 11th head coach in the team's 24-year history. Under Wilson, veteran players like Adam Oates, Dale Hunter, and Phil Housley returned to some of their old form, each notching their 1,000th career point that year. In addition, the team was boosted by Peter Bondra's league-leading 52-goal performance and a breakout year by goaltender Olaf Kolzig, landing them back in the playoffs. In the first round against Boston, the series would go to overtime for half the games, but thanks to timely goals by Adam Oates, Sergei Gonchar, and Brian Bellows, the Capitals were able to eliminate the Bruins in 6 games. Moving on to the second round, Washington's series against Ottawa would not be as closely contested as their series against Boston. With Joe Juneau leading the way offensively during this series, and Olaf Kolzig stopping 161 of the 168 shots he faced, the Capitals knocked off the Senators in 5 games to advance to the conference finals for only the second time in the club's history. Against Buffalo, Washington's third playoff series would be a battle of goaltenders between Olaf Kolzig and the 4-time Vezina Trophy winner Dominik Hasek. Over 6 games, 3 of which went to overtime, both goalies would face at least 170 shots and post 1 shutout each. Though their goals against was nearly neck and neck, Kolzig would hold out to be the better goaltender this time, after Joe Juneau scored 6 minutes and 24 seconds into overtime in Game 6 to send the Capitals to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time ever. Unfortunately, like the club's first trip to the conference finals 8 years earlier, Washington's first trip to the Stanley Cup Finals ended with them getting swept in 4 games by the defending Stanley Cup champion Detroit Red Wings, who managed to outshoot the Capitals 163-99 and outscore them 13-7. Since this one trip to the finals, Washington has gone through a bit of a rebuilding phase from which they have been able to achieve even more regular season honors. But when it comes to the playoffs, the Capitals are once again trying to figure out what they need to do to make it past the second round.